maximum about 20 minutes, no, it's too much. Let's say about 15 minutes, try to be 15 minutes each one. So then we have some time for discussions and like that. Because I think we have 3 presentations, then I will read that one of Leonel, or maybe he's arriving in Devon, he will read it, the paper that was sent by Leonel from Cuba that he could not attend because he had undergoing an eye operation. So I think we can start, depending if you want a special order, or we start, let's say, with the ladies. Maybe we can start with, well, first of all, I would like to tell something about COVID and Latin America. I am attending now here in other sessions. I'm working on this since a long time. COVID has been affecting all around the world and is affecting in a particular way Latin America, has been increasing, I would say, the gap between the industrialized countries like Europe, United States, and so on. And Latin America has been doing very many efforts to keep up with this vaccination, but we had very much contradictory news. Well, surely we know the first attitude we had in Brazil of negationists about the president, actual government. So it was a big delay and with a big toll of dead people in the beginning. Then we had practically that was ignored completely the situation in Cuba. Instead, Cuba, as we know, is a very first class in the world on medicine, especially on vaccine. They have been doing their own vaccine, Soberana, and another one, but has never been talking about it, has been commercialized in only a few countries. And the big gap is that Soberana is costing much less than those of Pfizer and Moderna, so no one wanted to take them because it was competitive. Then we have Pedro Vacaflor, who is from Bolivia, and Bolivia too, as he will explain, had a year of turmoil, of change of government, mismanagement, so they started very late with the pandemic. And then we will hear, very interesting to have news directly from the USA, not filtered through the press or through the news that were arriving, and to tell about how's the feeling. I think anyway, this COVID is on one side is being, it's changing the whole world. When we met last year, we were thinking it was just 1 year, and then we were starting again to go on like usual, business like usual. No, I think has been changing completely the way of thinking of the people, has been really giving again back to some values, and I think is a big opportunity in all the fields to start again to something else, like we will discuss tomorrow about the problems of demography and urbanization and so on. So I think it's very interesting that we take a lesson from what we learned in this year, and especially from the people from bottom-up mobilization that has been obliging governments all around to change. I think in Bolivia almost changed the government. In Brazil, they will go to new elections, and we hope that finally we are, well, it's not politically correct, but I think we can say it in Race of Asia, we go back to another government again, like it was before. And in America, we have been seeing what is going on. And the pandemic is not ended. The pandemic is going on. So this is, they will tell us it's ended, but we have to live in another way and have to learn how to live better among us, and we should improve our social cohesion, our life, and I think this platform is perfect for that. So I leave the word, I think, to the first to be Beatriz, so Beatriz can update us about Brazil today and future hopes in the next month. Muito obrigado. A você.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Darwish, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be to meet you all, new and old friends in this platform. And I will share my screen to present you what I prepared for today's session about what is nowadays happening in Brazil. And I hope after we can have perhaps some discussion on what we all are going to present to you. So I call my presentation The Pandemic in Brazil, Social and Political Consequences. And I will start with this, which is well known, the death toll of the COVID-19 virus in accordance to the World Health Organization, that has taken more than 5 million lives worldwide. And of course, we know that most leaders have expressed sorrow for this very terrible human tragedy. And I have put here some of the figures, and you can see that Brazil is the second in this unfortunate column of the deaths as a consequence of COVID-19. But the Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, has shown complete indifference in his response to the country's COVID-19 deaths. And let's remind that in Brazil, the pandemic had taken more than 600,000 lives, the world's second highest toll in absolute numbers, and registered over 21 million reported cases. To make things worse, this health crisis takes place in a context of a prolonged economic recession and recurring attacks on democratic institutions, most by Bolsonaro himself. I can say also that there is a tradition in Brazil, and I'm quoting here, and the Institute for Health Metrics at the University of Washington, that confirmed that Brazil and China were, and I'm quoting this data from 2016, Brazil and China were among the countries with the highest vaccine coverage rates, with 99.7 and 99.9% of the target population immunized, respectively. And let me remind the importance of this tradition in Brazil. The state traditionally, not only the federal state, but the states, Brazil is a federation, yeah, of more than 20 states. Each state, which is in some way very autonomous in relation to health care, had a tradition of very successful vaccination campaigns using the media. And there is a very popular figure, I'm bringing it here, Se Gotinha, which I could translate as Joe Tiny Drop, that was the symbol of the Brazilian poliomyelitis vaccination campaign, and it is already used for any kind of vaccination. And it is due to this remarkable public healthcare capacity to rapidly deploy vaccines nationwide that Brazil has, in part, only partially, of course, neutralized the Bolsonaro's government terrible response to COVID-19. And this is because in the space that the autonomy of the states and the municipalities, they have tried, at least those who have a correct attitude and conscious attitude, they have tried to neutralize or to contradict what the members of Bolsonaro's government, particularly the health minister, which was and still is a general, a member of the army forces, tried to put to the public opinion that the vaccines were not efficient, not trustable, and also trying to avoid the possibility of people to be vaccinated. So this is part of the explanation of the tragedy. And here you have a picture of an action that was carried out in Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro, but also repeated in other cities in the memory and honor of those who were the victims of this really genocide of the government. So, as I mentioned, many governments and measures attempt to adopt several local restrictions. For instance, as a consequence, the schools in some of the states were closed. The universities, with the federal universities, for example, to whom I belong, and using the autonomy that has by law, decided to go only to online activities since March 2020. But the government insisted till now, using all the resources, all the means he has at its disposal, to contradict this autonomous determination of our and many other universities. And it is a new field of controversy, what we are now facing, for instance, in the highest education. Here I brought another picture of one of thousands of manifestations in the streets, in the beaches, all along the country, trying to create a conscience among public opinion about what this attitude of the government means, a genocide, a real genocide. And as I put here, Bolsonaro's response to COVID-19 has arguably been the most negligent among extreme right leaders in democracies. I can affirm you that the consequences are really tragic. But as I mentioned, there is a long tradition in Brazil of vaccination, successfully campaigns of vaccinations, and therefore the numbers are quite interesting because they show that people, on the contrary, as it was mentioned, for instance, in the session we had before, that in some countries in Europe, people do not like to be vaccinated because it was in the past mandatory from the Soviet period, etc. Now we can see in Brazil how important it was that even being mandatory, people were aware of the importance of vaccine and are happy to go to vaccinate and to take the children to vaccinate now, which is occurring at this moment. And here this picture shows that there is an important part of the population that has at least one doses, some less, but a representative number of people with the 2 doses, and of course only a few, but even though the most important, the elders, etc., with the 2 doses and more, to confirm the importance of revaccination. And so the data show that despite government denialism, Brazilians have confidence in vaccines. Almost 71% of the population has at least has been totally vaccinated, and almost 90% with at least 1 dose. But we can mention the social consequences of COVID, but not only COVID, but aggravated with the neoliberal laws that are not only a responsibility of Bolsonaro's government, but since the coup d'etat, we can affirm it was a coup d'etat through means of what we are called this new way of conceiving the war, through the judiciary, the mass media, and also part of the Congress. When in 2016, President Rousseff was dropped from power. So since then, the very, very strict neoliberal laws that were implemented have and aggravated with the COVID-19 had created a new, very terrible situation in Brazil where 2 million people do not have enough food. And that is a very recent research in last December. And the perspective is that the inflation, which is high and will come higher, will worsen this scenario. And these numbers are a reflection of the increase in poverty in the country. Almost 20 million declared that they have spent 24 hours or more without having eaten. 24.5 million, that means 11% of the population, have worsened their diet in the last year, not sure how they would eat that day. And another 74 million, that means 35% of the population, feared going through hunger in the next period. So, although the space for investments in the federal government budget shrinks year after year, the Ministry of Defense has managed to increase its share of this expenditure, gaining priority over areas such health and education and infrastructure. And this is the picture of the priorities of Bolsonaro's government. By 2022, defense has the equivalent of 20.7% of the total budget authorized for this year. That means that is one of the ways we have to interpret it, what the government really is and which interest is representing. Because at this moment, more than 6,000 military personnel occupy civilian positions in Jair Bolsonaro's government. And here you have this very interesting graphic showing how the military personnel assigned to civilian posts have risen from 2005 to 2020. It's a very significant figure now in relation to what it was at the first years of our 21st century. And nowadays we have 10 military ministers in a government which has 18 ministries. And the most important ministries are occupied by generals or members of the army or of the military police. There was a military inquiry commission, very important, parliamentary inquiry commission, a very important commission that took more than 6 months, and all the sessions were transmitted by the official TV channel of the Congress. And the findings from the Parliamentary Inquiry Commission, which was mainly integrated by senators, revealed that widespread contagion was Bolsonaro's unofficial policy. According to the government narrative, which is of course reproduced by the supporters, even though the supporters inside the Congress, cruelty lies not in allowing the disease to spread, but but in trying to suppress fundamental individual liberties. Neoliberal thinking, yeah, including the right not to wear a mask and not to take vaccines, boasting freedom is more important than life itself. The Parliamentary Inquiry Commission has caused the opening of at least 8 investigations, and one of the figures that will be investigated or should be investigated is President Jair Bolsonaro itself, as the report shows. But
Beatriz, 5 minutos.
Okay, I will do my best to finish. So I really at the end, and perhaps I can answer some questions after that. So you can imagine in this context, in this scenario, what will mean the general election that will be held in October. Yeah, it is a very important election. We will elect the president, the Congress, the two chambers of the Congress, all the governors, all the deputies, federal deputies, state deputies. So it's more than 10,000 posts are going to be elected. But in this context, there is no way to assure that everything is going to be calm, with transparency, with the right to go to the mass media and speak freely. There is no way to assure that. And in particular, because former President Lula da Silva is leaving the voting intentions in the polls with possibilities of winning in the first turn. Of course, that will be a major transformation, even though we know all of those who accompany the politics are aware that the new presidential period of President Lula, if elected, and if he has the chance to be really in power, will be very different from those in the past, because the scenario, the country he will inherit, it's quite different from the one he governed some years ago. But as I mentioned, in this scenario, there are many uncertainties about the role of Bolsonaro, the president's supporters, and the armed forces themselves, in case the progressive leader, Lula, wins. And if he wins, and if the victory is secured, there is also much doubt, very high level of doubt about the probability of the governability of the government. But let's be optimistic. It is a chance we have, and I hope we will prove that we have the consciousness enough to see what is really in the possibility of changing or not, what is the meaning of that, and not only for Brazil, but for South America as a whole, as I may say. I hope we Brazilians, I am native from Uruguay, but I have also the Brazilian citizenship, and I hope we will have conscience enough to put an end to this government who is killing the Brazilian population. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beatriz, for the very nice presentation of the important data you gave, and for the hopes that we are sharing for the future. I suggest that we hear all the presentations and we leave the time for the questions and answers after. What do you think? Are you agreeing? Well, then I will continue. Let's talk then maybe Pedro Vacaflor. Puede hablar él así about Bolivia. So we're keeping in the same area, and it's very interesting what he will tell about Bolivia that we're not knowing so much good as Brazil. Pedro, adelante, por favor. Gracias. ¿Estás?
Thank you. Let me thank you. Let me share the screen with you if I can. Let's see. I don't know if you can see the screen.
No, no se ve. Ahí está. Ahí la tenemos.
Okay. Bolivia's COVID statistics are better than most countries. For the region, it's quite good. We have just over 21,000 deaths around 875,000 cases overall, so close to 1 million. Considering that Bolivia has a population of only 11 million people, so that's not so bad. Per capita, we have oscillated over the months from almost 200 a month to around 42. That's what we have now, around 42 deaths per month. So these are not bad averages compared to the rest of the region, but as we will see later, statistics in Bolivia may not be very reliable. So one of the other things that we did during the pandemic were the lockdowns. The lockdowns were very effective. The initial lockdowns in Bolivia were very effective. This had an enormous effect, an enormous economic effect, obviously, as it did in the rest of the world. Our GDP dropped anywhere between 8 and 12%, depending on who you ask, because again, statistics in Bolivia are always a difficult issue. This put a special strain on things like education, for example, families with children, for example, weren't allowed to send children to school, and we had to go to the internet for that. But in Bolivia, there's only, at least at the beginning of 2020, there was only about 45% of the population with access to the internet, and only 7% with broadband. So most rural areas do not have connections, and most teachers do not have the experience or the training for online education, and this will have probably long-lasting consequences. For example, the value of the loss of future earnings from children that have lost 2 years of education won't be actually felt in the economy until 10 or 20 years from now. So that's something that we have to look forward to. Vaccination. In vaccination, we're doing quite well. Well, actually poorly compared to the region, but I've seen other regions that are doing worse. Bolivia is the second to last, only after Paraguay in South America. So that's not so good. There have been some problems with vaccination that I will try to get into later. A vaccine mandate was installed with a vaccine ID that had to be presented, for example, to get into stores, to get into public buildings, even for banking. You had to present your ID, your vaccination ID. But however, many people got vaccinated at the beginning of this year, precisely because this mandate was coming. It was supposed to come into effect at the beginning of February, I believe. And so there were enormous lines for people to try and get their vaccines, but protests started against the vaccination, some of them even led by people in government, something similar to what happened in Brazil. The vice president of Bolivia, Mr. Choquehuanca, said that he trusted more in traditional medicine and that he was eating grass to avoid getting COVID. And but finally, after when the discussions over the vaccine mandate were going on, the president was backing the mandate, but the vice president was not, and he finally agreed to take the vaccine after a celebration of a party of something. And a few days later, he announced that he had COVID. So it's an iffy situation there. Now, I wanted to speak. So that's the data, the hard data on what's happening. I wanted to speak of how the coronavirus affected Bolivia since its beginning, because it caught Bolivia in a very uncomfortable situation politically. A cultural reactions to the pandemic and its effects have been divergent in Bolivia. Many have cost an unnecessary number of deaths. As the pandemic started all around the world, Bolivia was in the middle of the greatest political turmoil in at least 15 years, a political situation that left a vacuum of government and international condemnation for electoral fraud. The government that was running for a fourth election, only 2 elections are allowed in Bolivia's constitution. There was even a referendum saying that no, they couldn't present themselves for re-election, but they went with it anyway. There were protests over fraud during the elections, and the government finally quit. So there was a vacuum in power, and by the end of 2019, the first cases of COVID were detected in China. Bolivia was in the middle of a political revolt over fraud and in a presidential election. Street protests all over the country led to the resignation of the president, the vice president, and everyone that was underneath the vice president. So after a series of resignations, the presidency fell on the vice president of the Senate, whose first action was to call for new elections. The new elections were set for May 3rd, 2020. Now, if you remember what happened in May 3rd, 2020 in the rest of the world, you know that May 2020 was not a good date for a good month for the world or Bolivia, and the pandemic surged. It started to become obvious that Bolivia's health services were not up to the task of dealing with a full-on pandemic. By March 17th, a national lockdown was decreed, and the date of the election sort of came into question. Nobody knew when that was going to happen. So the transitional government wanted to delay the election until the pandemic was under control. Nobody knew when that was going to be a possibility. And the political party that had just resigned claimed that the pandemic was a hoax invented by the imperialists in Washington to prevent Bolivian elections, which is far-fetched. But that was the claim, because what they wanted is to force the transitional government to hold the elections as quickly as possible. In this context, the pandemic took a backseat to the political crisis. However, the initial lockdown was very effective. Perhaps the level of organization that had already developed during the protests helped in getting people organized, because the lockdowns, the protests were so large that that people had to coordinate for shopping. There were only a few days where people were allowed to go shopping and things like that, for food and things. Whatever it was, Bolivia had a very effective lockdown. Bolivia had the best performance of Latin America with a mobility reduction of 90%, while the rest of the countries registered decreases of around 60 to 70%, like in Chile and Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and even the United Kingdom were around 75 and 80% of the effectiveness of the lockdown. This is a quote from the Google Mobility Report. Now, the first Google Mobility Report, this is an interesting thing that I found. It came out as a result of a collaboration between journalists from The Economist and the number crunchers at Google. They came up with this mobility index as a way to measure something that was otherwise practically impossible to measure without some kind of 1984 type surveillance. So I mention this because measuring and developing statistics is a very difficult thing in Bolivia. We have, for example, around 70 to 80% of the labor force working in the informal sector. So people are very used to informality. Informality is prevalent. Official statistics are hard to come by. There are many regions of Bolivia that are very hard to get to physically, and information is hard to take to those places. Travel is complicated because the roads are not very good, and medical supplies are very scarce in those regions. There's not many hospitals. This chart I'm showing you is about trying to get through the things that happened while the pandemic was going on. You see the first date for the election was as it was starting. The election finally took place when we just got over the hump of the first wave. The government change came in just as we were going into the second wave, and the first vaccination started when we started with the going through the coming down from that peak. So the pandemic put much strain on a health system that was not in very good shape to begin with. And so as we went along, some of the things that happened politically were kind of strange. The cultural issues that took place kind of went on a political split, because you have a traditional culture that doesn't believe in some of the concepts of science, some of the concepts of vaccination and things like that. And this was exacerbated by the position of some of the political leaders that were also claiming that this was a hoax, that we could get over it, that herd immunity could be achieved just by contagion and things like that. But so health was a problem because of the lack of hospitals and other remote rural areas, for example, that were thought to be relatively safe from contagious, did not adhere to the mask mandates or lockdowns, probably because they thought they were safer, but also for cultural reasons. We're still, as rural migrants that had gone to the city returned to their villages to look for the safety, and also because there was no work in the cities, they brought with them the disease to these rural areas, and it was very bad. Many of these regions do not have any health installations whatsoever, and normally rely on traditional medicine or have to be taken to the nearest town with a public hospital. In many cases, this can be a journey of several days. So it was very difficult. So once the reality of the pandemic became obvious and the elections were delayed until the end of 2020, the electoral campaigns took center stage, and the pandemic became its central issue. One side denounced corruption in the purchasing of medical equipment, which was very expensive at the time because everybody was looking for these things around the world. The other side said, blamed the previous party because they hadn't built enough hospitals and had the hospitals were empty. They had no beds, for example. They had no equipment, or equipment was misplaced, or had actually never started to work. So there were accusations thrown about all over the place. Coming back to the numbers, one issue that became very important for counting how many died is the burial ceremonies. Very important in many of the different cultures in the country. COVID victims are dealt with special hazard protocols, and families are not allowed to see their dead. However, if the death is not reported as a COVID, the family can officiate the traditional burial rituals. So there is an unknown and unknowable number of deaths by COVID that were reported as something else. Some international statistics are compounding numbers and trying to find, for example, this is these are the cumulative deaths per million in the region.
5 minutos.
Bolivia is at the bottom of this list, right, very close to high-income countries. But that's probably because most of the deaths in some of the regions with the largest populations of the country were not reported as COVID deaths. So this graph here shows excess mortality. This is when you measure how many people normally die in a year and how many people have died in this year. So this kind of shows that, yep, there has been an excess, but it hasn't been reported. Bolivia is in second place after Peru in this chart, precisely because there have been more deaths, that have not been reported as COVID. So this cultural issues are affecting the way we measure and the way the government and the Bolivian nation as a whole confronts COVID. So there is incredulity on one side, and there is also corruption. For example, there are cases of vaccination centers where you could pay to get your vaccination ID, but not get the vaccine. So these are issues that we will have to deal with over time. If the pandemic ended now, these issues would still be there. There is still not enough health care for Bolivian people. There is still a lack of infrastructure to get people to and from hospitals, and there is this rift, this political rift that was opened when protests started because they wanted to have the election sooner, and the pandemic was going on. Roadblocks, for example, stopped oxygen from getting to one part of the country to the other. Again, the infrastructure, there is only one big oxygen generating plant in the country, and so they couldn't get the oxygen to the rest of the country because the roads were blocked, and this created a rift between the two competing sides in the political and the cultural landscape of Bolivia. And that's I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for the interesting data, knowing that, well, we see now from this last figure that also if you had a small population, the rate of the death was quite high in percent. And you were talking about phenomena who are the same all around the world, more or less in the same way, about the corruption, about the difficulties to get the health services and so on. And you were talking that this is putting in evidence all the problems of the rural areas that have no broadband, have to walk days to arrive to hospital and so on. So this is a general change that we are talking in the entire platform. So I think this is very similar to all the Latin American situation, more or less, between the big cities and the rural areas. In Bolivia, still more for the characteristics of the country. And then you were touching a very big problem that we are not considering too much now, is about the cultural, because 2 years of practically no schools or no teaching will have surely an impact on the next years, for sure. But I would say then, give now the word to Grace. Grace, are you there to tell us about the United States? We are very curious.
Yes, I am here.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I would like to share my screen. So
Yeah.
I think it says I should
Pedro,
wait
tienes que cerrar la pantalla.
I'll do that now.
Just waiting for Pedro, if you can
Pedro has to close
remove
it.
your screen.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Thank you. That's so interesting, everyone. There's a lot of overlap for our presentations. And yeah, I think we have one of the overlaps is the kind of issues about whether this is something believable. Some of the populations in our various countries, for various different reasons, find this to be not plausible in there. And it's very much affected politics in the United States as well in different ways. And so I'm going to focus on that. And so, you know, I think one of the things that we see and this map show is like how people who, you know, initially they don't believe in the COVID pandemic as a reality, and then they don't believe in any of the precautions, and then they're very concerned about the vaccines. And you know, if you look at this map that shows it's from last year, but it's pretty much, you know, these don't really waver very much. There are different pockets within the United States which have very low vaccination rates. So we have very high rates here in the Northeast, close to 80% here in the Northeast area, known as New England. And then we have like the lowest rates, like close to 80 up in New England, and then, you know, under 50 in the the Southeast in many parts of the United States. And that roughly corresponds to the political alignments. If you look at the map with the red and blue on the right, the blue meaning leaning more towards the Democratic Party, more liberal population, the red tending to vote Republican and being more on the right politically. And this is, something that's persistent. I think, there are some minds being changed because of, some of the persistent problems that are associated with it, especially, with the impact of hospitalizations. This has driven many healthcare workers to retire. And it's also because of the need to hire more healthcare workers in some counties, drawing them from other places, other parts of the country. This has kind of left, kind of created a new kind of dynamic within the healthcare system, the distribution, and it's kind of mobilized them. And so, in some counties has been, having trouble finding enough staffing. And this is, I think some people maybe, did not really believe initially. I think there's more change. So actually, I was quite surprised that we had such a high vaccination rate because it is so loud politically. The anti-vaccination voices, as well as the anti-COVID, the people who did not believe that there really was a pandemic, believing. And I think that's so interesting, Pedro, that in Bolivia, people sort of thought it was like an imperialist plot. But yeah, in the United States, it's also sort of similar. It's associated with like the deep state. It is a way of, those who want big government to restrict our freedoms, to impose rules on us and so forth. So currently, we are seeing some spillover. I don't think we have a Canadian presenter here. That would be interesting because there's a big, a lot of ruckus in the Canadian capital, Ottawa, with the truckers who who reject the Canadian government's vaccine mandate. And that sort of spilled over to the US-Canada border. And, one of the effects of COVID, I think globally is how it has affected the supply chain because of its impact on people showing up for their work, right? And this with effect, this being specifically a protest by truckers, those who are delivering essential goods all between the two countries in a significant portion of the North American continent. This is even more disruptive for the supply chain, which we're already suffering from. If you go into the store, I mean, we are one of the so-called advanced economies, but still, you can certainly feel that when you go to the stores. There is there's a lot fewer goods, prices are noticeably higher and so forth. So this does not help, and it's driven by these kinds of views that are skeptical of the science, of the medical practice, and so forth. So we've had, I think, there's the political leadership who has been very vocal, denying that this really is a pandemic, that distancing and other protective measures like masking are necessary. For a while, stores were restricting the number of people who they would allow inside. This was more so last year than recently, when people started, this is before the vaccinations were available. And this, we've seen number of protests, right? Like people just kind of bursting into stores without masking. And this is captured in these pictures in a major chain. So it's driven a lot of kind of odd, unexpected kind of political protests by the truckers we see, right, which is unusual for those reasons, just by regular persons, consumers. And there's many reports, right, of the staff in stores being unable to, being accosted, right, physically threatened or assaulted, and sometimes even killed because they asked people to wear a mask. And so it's become, you know, a very problematic social issue, at least initially. Now I think people are a little bit more used to it. We haven't heard so much of this, but you know, certainly it's inspired a lot of violence. This is a potentially really deadly incident involving the governor of Michigan, who had proposed on a state level restrictions on, you know, people for social distancing, right, masking, and, you know, again, right, people feel this is a violation of their individual choice and freedom. And so these 13 men, there was a plot uncovered that they were planning to kidnap her, and much worse, right, because she wanted to issue these rather preventative measures at the state level, require them at the state level. And I am in San Diego, which is in California, and our governor had tried the same thing initially, and has, you know, generally prevailed, but it's been, you know, he used to give press conferences every day to update the state about, you know, what is happening, what the government measures are doing. And initially, you know, there was a lot of concern to promote guidelines and mandates at the state level. And there was a lot of pushback from various counties. So, you know, the governor of California did step back on that and allowed counties to make their own decisions. But, you know, it's created all of these pressures. And this incident, right, was very alarming because of the threats of violence against the governor. And, you know, it was really alarming that people spoke out against her, including, you know, here we have a sheriff in Governor Whitmer's state of Michigan defending those who are threatening to kidnap the governor. But President Trump also spoke, you know, very, very much like in sympathy with her would-be kidnappers as well. So this is a very alarming kind of developments that we're hearing from you know, it's these people at the top levels of government giving rise to these kinds of very dangerous militia who came out. And this is again in Michigan government state legislature. A large group of armed persons showed up at the Capitol and entered into the building with their weapons, and they greatly outnumbered the security in the building, and to prevent the legislature from taking action on measures to prevent the spread of COVID last year. So this is, you know, kind of a predecessor, right, a precursor to the June 6th insurrection at the US Capitol in Washington, DC, where you saw the large numbers of people entering the National Capitol building. So that had already happened in Michigan, right? And there were already many groups that were, you know, mobilizing and protesting. Probably the most dramatic before the January 6th insurrection was in Michigan. But there were numerous different ones, group, you know, organized from supermarket protests to sieges in Capitol. Also individually, there were, because President Trump kept calling it the China flu. So many attacks, the attacks on people of Asian descent in the United States were really significant. High levels of violence, you know, and threats, verbal assaults reported against Asian Americans, you know, of all different backgrounds, because it's kind of just really an excuse, right, for people who are rather xenophobic and don't like people of other ethnicities and so forth. So it didn't, of course, target. Even though it's called, the president had called it the China virus, it didn't target specifically, right, Chinese Americans, all sorts of people of Asian descent. So it had a deep level of impact. And, it's still ongoing in that case. So, I think we're looking into the background, like how this happened. Was there such mistrust? I mean, from early on, from the beginning of the Trump administration, just months into his presidency, well, less than a month, he cut spending over $1 billion on a program on prevention and public health at the Center for Disease Control. He scrapped, the previous administration's plans for pandemic preparedness. He removed U.S. staffers in China who were working for, Center for Disease Control staffers from the United States who were working in China to coordinate, to report and become, be aware of any sort of disease outbreak in China. So all of those avenues of collaboration were removed. Resources throughout the government were cut. And like Beatrice was talking about, right, major positions within the public health institutions and the organizations such as Homeland Security, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, those personnel were removed. Sometimes they were replaced with those who are compliant. Sometimes they were just not replaced at all. So you have people in positions of decision making and authority who did not take the science, the information very seriously. And this was, I think, a big concern for those who remained, and especially there have been some figures who have remained and still are within the public health at the federal level in the U.S. who kind of weathered this at great, I think a great cost to their personal mental health probably, but they did keep us on track. So we are, fortunate for that. But yeah, it's a similar thing. So it's very difficult, very confusing, because the message from the federal level was mixed, given that, primarily the political appointees of President Trump were always diminishing any of the science, and we're addressing it, through this idea of herd immunity, or it's not that contagious, it's just a flu. You can take hydrochloroquine, you can ingest disinfectant, all of these kinds of nonsensical things, sometimes coming out of the mouth of the president, but with people believing them, right? People who are willing to listen to that rather than the experts. So that's what's interesting is that there is a background. It didn't come all of a sudden, this denial of science. There is, a history of that about climate change, for example. It's still resistant, and we still see that, which is the origins. Okay, so I think, we'd already had this idea that there is no one truth, that people don't all subscribe to the same truth. This was already word of the year before President Trump took office, right? But I think during his administration, this was very, for any other, because it was very divisive, right? For any other, I think, administration, you would think that this would bring people together, but it's caused greater political divisions. And some of the analysis is that this is widespread with many of the issues that have did arise during his administration, the impeachment process, and even now, right, with the inquiry about the January 6th insurrection, there are two different, views of what are facts and what is believable. And I don't think I think this is a very big concern. We don't think we have people who think that two sets of facts and are not, debating a common set of facts and how to interpret it. But so, this term tribal epistemology has been thrown about. The idea of, facts is not really, it's not really a debate about information. It's really, part of a deeper sort of identity politics that is emerging here. Two separate issues. And we've seen that from the very beginning of the administration, where President Trump's staff, and he claimed he had the greatest turnout of any inauguration. And, you cannot, right? People did not believe these pictures, did not believe the evidence. And this is the problem, right? Like, we have emerging two very different community, or two different epistemic communities. I think that this has become clear. I think like I said, I hopefully, because of the suffering as a result of COVID, there are people who, are, seeing the impact on health and on society. But there remains like a very strong, right, a very strong portion of the population who is sees this as a deep state, right, deep state conspiracy to take away freedoms and impose some nefarious agenda. So no matter how much, right, you provide as evidence, that is not convincing for them. And certainly we saw the social media, putting Twitter, putting Facebook, putting them in the hot seat for their failure to restrict some of the false information has been a big contributor to this, but we shall see. So, and this is, I think, the big outcome. So besides public health, besides the economic, how much has it affected the economy? So I'm sorry, the democracy. So we will hopefully see a more positive direction, more contemplative, but we are seeing, like I said, these divisions continue to be expressed, although hopefully it's a minority, a very vocal minority, and we can, our students are, very troubled by this. So hopefully at least the next generation, can understand and look at media more critically. So our democracy can not be so divided, because specifically in this case, they are divided. There is a group who has no faith in the institutions, in the expertise, and in the government agencies, such as those governing public health. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace, for the long and very interesting chat. You were saying, well, confirming all we have been following in the last years, with the big role that now are playing the social media. So it's a matter always of culture. Was very impressive, the map you were showing in the beginning in the States about those no vaccinating, corresponding more or less to the Republican central part of the States. I've been voting Republican always since 1 century. So the two coasts, Democratic, and you're living in San Diego, and the East Coast and the West Coast and the center, and the way that all this is moving now. The misinformation is terrible, and the more time is passing, and the more time restrictions are keeping on. You see also Europe is forced now from this week to start to lift up everything, because every day is more people voting to the right. So more restrictions, more votes to the right. The protests are growing and growing. No one knew here in Italy, well, in Europe, we didn't know very much, but I've been following what is happening in Canada. You're thinking it's a quiet country with a government by Mr. Trudeau working on. Canada is completely paralyzed because they have been blocking the truckers, not only the borders, but the big cities. You cannot get into Ontario, into Ottawa, into Montreal. So it is a big part of the population is misinformation and misculture. So till we don't have a higher culture, we will get victims of the fake news. And this is terrible, thinking to the future generations. Well, I would now read then, probably has not been arriving, Devon, I would read the intervention from the other side of the of America about Cuba. It's interesting to hear how things are going there. We can just read the information that was sending the Professor Leonel, and then after we have time to have some discussions. I will try to put on my
Hi, Paolo, I'm here. Sorry.
Tell me.
No, it's Devon. I'm here.
No, you have to close. Hi, Devon. Then, well, you have the document of Leonel, so it's time to you. Okay. The better Guyana is close to Cuba in any way, so you can talk about it. Okay.
Excuse me, do you want me to try to see if it works with the video that Leonel sent to me? I'm not sure if it will work.
Well, I have it. I can try. I have it here. Wait a minute. But I have other screens open of the other people. Oh, here I have it. Wait a minute. Here I have it. Can you read it? Can you see it?
Yes. Paolo, I think Beatrice is saying that she has a video.
Oh, well, I don't know. Are you seeing my screen or not?
Yes.
Okay, but then who is reading? I think I can read it, Devon, or you have it, Devon.
You have to, I think you have to choose either reading or both, of course, reading the text or visualizing the video.
I have no video.
Yes, so Beatrice is saying she has a video.
I have
Okay, then I close my screen. Okay, I close my screen.
Okay, I'll try because I'm not sure if it works. But
it works. You remember? You remember last year when Mila screening the film of non-alignment in Belgrade, but you put on in your computer after it is running, and then you share with others.
He sent to me through WhatsApp. I have it on WhatsApp. Let's see. I'll try my best. Okay. Okay.
The Cuban strategy against the COVID-19 pandemic and its results. The alternative of a nation with a revolutionary project of human development inspired by social justice, equity, solidarity, and internationalism. First of all, I would like to clarify that I do not intend, because I do not feel qualified either, to make a presentation full of data and figures that can cover all aspects of Cuba's strategy against COVID-19. On the contrary, I would only like to offer the necessary elements to incite further investigation by those who are interested in the matter. At the same time, I propose a very personal point of view of a political and social nature. I think that the most important result of the Cuban strategy in the face of a SARS-CoV-2 pandemic of special interest to academics and scholars of the social science is that it allowed to validate and confirm the fairness of a political, economic, and social project developed by the Cuban Revolution as of January 1st, 1959, and a level of public consensus that supports it 63 years after its implementation. This test has occurred during a period of greatest economic, financial, and strategic adversity for Cuba. due to the drastic reduction of a country's productive, commercial, and tourist activity. This situation was further aggravated by the intensification of a war of economic, commercial, financial, and propaganda subversion implemented by the United States government under the presidency of Donald Trump and maintained by the Joe Biden administration. Both the Republican and the Democrat demonstrated that they
It stopped. I don't know.
All right. Okay. So what I'll do.
I think
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
text, yeah, is more complete. I think.
Okay.
Because,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
please, Devon or Paolo, you can read it quickly. I think.
All right. Let me just continue from where he left off. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Both the Republican and the Democrats demonstrated that they pursue the same objective of promoting the overthrow of the revolution. The strategy in the facts.
Maybe you can share the text. No? What do you think? You can share the text.
I have the test, but I have been sending to you, I think, the test, but
No, you can share your screen and we can
and Devon is
hear.
reading, okay, and Devon is reading, okay, let's do like that. Okay.
Okay, should I wait or continue?
Wait a minute, you read.
Okay.
I don't know where you are.
Okay, yeah, it's good. Okay, good.
Despite the shortcomings and difficulties mentioned, Cuba has accomplished an amazing medical feat, managing to control the pandemic with its own scientific and technological resources, with its own vaccines and medicines, a qualified body of doctors, nurses, technicians, and auxiliary personnel, as well as high-quality hospital services, available free of charge to the entire population without distinction of any kind. Cuba undertook the development of 5 vaccine candidates of its own in its biotechnological and pharmaceutical scientific research and development centers. At the end of February the 3rd, 9,839,682 Cubans completed their vaccination scheme against COVID-19, according to a report from the Ministry of Public Health. This figure means that 88% of the Cuban population has already completed the vaccination scheme with the Cuban anti-COVID-19 vaccines, Soberana Dos, Soberana Plus, and Abdala. In addition, some 5,491,520 people have already been vaccinated with the booster dose. At the end of August last year, Cuba became the first country in the world to vaccinate minors from 2 years of age with a national vaccine against COVID-19, Soberana Plus. The results are visible, and today they are the subject of frequent reports in respected media outlets, including those that tend to bow to Washington's directives. On December 30th, the United States television network reported with marked intentionality that Mexico joined a small handful of countries that have authorized the use of the Cuban Abdala vaccine against the coronavirus, as if it were committing a foolish act. CNN itself recognized that despite the worsening of the economy and the increase in the United States sanctions against Cuba, the island has managed to develop 5 candidates for the vaccine against COVID-19, 3 of which have obtained the authorization for use by the Regulatory Authority for Medicines, Equipment and Medical Devices of Cuba, SECMED, a local regulatory authority recognized by the WHO. The American television station had to recognize that the Federal Commission for the Protection Against Sanitary Risks of Mexico, COFREPIS, announced on December 29th the authorization of the emergency use of Abdala. Through a statement, COFREPIS detailed that specialized personnel carried out the technical scientific review of the vaccine and determined that it met the quality, safety, and efficacy requirements. In addition to Cuba and Mexico, the Abdala vaccine has been authorized in Vietnam, Iran, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. This information alone explains the scope of the Cuban feat against COVID-19, and above all, the solidarity and internationalist nature of Cuban health. As a conclusion to my exposition, without claiming to exhaust the subject, which implies many other scientific, technical, medical, and social achievements, which it is impossible to address in such a short space, I would like to recall that Cuba is the second country in the world with the most vaccinations against COVID-19, according to the global reference site, Our Worlds in Data. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That's it from Lionel.
Wait a minute, I take out. Oh, here. What can I do?
Stop sharing.
Yeah, I know. Wait a minute. Okay, here I am. Here I am. I go there. I stop sharing the.
So I think we have about 8 minutes left.
Yeah.
If anyone has questions or comments, we can take them.
Did I stop? Did I stop sharing?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Well, who is talking? Maybe I can make. I see there's no questions. This is surprising me, but anyway, I don't see any special question. I would say then what is emerging from all these very different countries that we have been seeing today. There are some data who are really coming out. This pandemic has been having not only health impacts or sanitary impacts. I think that the impacts are much more deep than what we're thinking. First of all is social, surely social, because we are seeing, and who knows what is deserving in the future, because in this moment, in one way, it is a strong reaction and is dividing the public opinion between the left and the right. And I would say that mostly of the no-vax movements are voting right, is what at least we're seeing in Europe. Those who are no-vax are mostly the right parties who are starting to get more and more power. And it's what has been happening in America under the Trump administration, what happened in Brazil. Then in Brazil, I have a question then to make to Beatriz, because somehow we think outside that the army maybe has been mitigating Bolsonaro somehow. And the effects will be very, very strong in the future. We don't know what is going to happen there, because we hope that we have another, again, return of Lula, but 6,000 officers having the biggest post in Brazil, they don't want to lose them anyway. So we will see what the army will say. In America is continuing this terrible fight between those who are following Trump administration. We were thinking that the Republican Party would have been taking a distance about it, but now, apart a few of them and just the former head of the Republican Party is still aligned with Trump, so more or less is following his policies. So it's really a difficult situation. And behind all this, the same has been seen in Bolivia, where the popular subleration succeeded to change the government. So the change is mostly political, social, and is involving all the different aspects of the life. So I believe that really is arriving, will arrive, or we should push for a shift that who knows if will be arriving. I have a theory that I don't know, I'm not negationist, but it's true that now someone has been taking the chance about all the dramatic vaccine situation, because this is making a completely change about the strong powers in the world. It's not anymore the owners of energy, of petrol, and so on, but it's also having the laboratories. And they're selling the vaccine at high prices. And to the poorest countries who cannot pay the vaccine, it's not that they're giving in present or they're using the COVAX system supposed to be more or less open to everyone. They will ask, or they're asking already back something. Maybe they will ask for lithium for concessions in Bolivia. Maybe they will ask for water concession in Argentina or Chile. They will ask for something else in the African countries and so on. This is happening both with Moderna and Pfizer. On the other side, the Covax, the Chinese, or the Sputnik has been, is a kind of war made around the vaccine. Then countries who have big capacity, like Cuba, who has been a leader in HEV vaccines against in Africa many years, 10 years ago, is completely kept out of the market. So really, I think this is giving us big reflections to where we are going, and that the problem is not only sanitary. I hope they were going fast to take pills instead of the vaccine. This will become really a very strong problem for the economies of the entire world. So it will strangle the emerging economies and the poorest countries. They will be becoming dependent always to pay for the vaccines. Until a global solution is not found, this will go on. Maybe it's interesting this is going to continue, but I really don't know. The question is in my head. I have no clear where we're going. But I think they have to make a big effort with bottom-up conferences or platforms like this one that was started a few years ago by Reserve is a big help to spread up new ideas, a different approach, and to be focused on social cohesion, on better quality of life, and climate change that maybe someone is saying is not true, but is there very strong. Well,
Thanks,
this is my
Paolo.
opinion. I would like to hear one by one the speakers that we have now to give their final comments about the discussion.
Paolo, just before, let's just have one round of questions. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask the speakers to take a note of the questions if it pertains to you, and then when you give your final thoughts, you answer any questions that might be directed to you. We have 3 questions. I'm going to take all of them at the same time, and then we'll turn it over to the speakers. I'll start with Professor Manoranjan, followed by Saif. I hope I got the name right. And after Saif, Itzhak. And then the speakers can comment. So Professor Manoranjan, please go ahead.
I only wanted to compliment all of them, and particularly, Beatrice's case study of Brazil was so comparable to the Indian experience in many respects, and of course, US experience. I only wanted to compliment, but if I have to add something, it is this, that it is in all the 3 cases, there is resistance. In other words, democratic politics is still alive in various degrees. That is our hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Okay, Saif, over to you.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity. I would like to ask this just one simple question. How did the COVID-19 pandemic affect the indigenous people and community of the Americas? Thank you.
All right. So whichever countries can answer that, just bear that in mind. And finally, Itzhak or Isaac.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for the insights. A few words, because we don't have so much time. From Canada, this is my second spontaneous contribution today. So we experienced a very interesting situation here. Thank you, Grace, for the situation. You really, I enjoyed it, hearing how you beyond the border, the southern border of Canada, you go through this the pandemic. Here we have it's the second week we have this convoy, this protest convoy coming from the west, and now you may know Ottawa is a small city, capital for a big country. And this is a very serious situation issue, because we have around 500 trucks in downtown Ottawa, and this is now a very important political issue, no, not only a sanitary one. And one of the points the aspects of the situation you pointed out, and which I want to just discuss a little bit, is the division which goes along the situation, how the pandemic is handled, tackled. And here in Canada, we face the same trends you pictured. This is, I mean, former President Trump last week mentioned the convoy for the Canadian heroes, and many political voices in the US comment the situation here in Canada. So we share the same trends without having the prominent actors you have, like Trump and so on. And thank you. So now the division, the political here, people try to reduce it and then find a way to solve the problem without increasing the gap between the groups involved in the protest. So we face now a release of the measures, and we have today two provinces where the measures will be removed, and Alberta, one of them, began today no more. Not to ask again about vaccine passport for people so that they can feel free. So there is a trend to find a consensus, a position, so that the tension may decrease here in the country. So thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. So let's just go around first with Pedro, then Beatrice, and then Grace. And don't forget the question from Saif in relation to how the pandemic may have affected indigenous communities in your country.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was a very interesting question. I kind of touched on it on my presentation, because Bolivian culture is very much integrated, but it's not Westernized. So there is like a Bolivian culture, but it's not Westernized enough so that we recognize it as something that we can see in other countries. So, for example, these people that would go back to the countryside or to their native lands work regularly in the cities. They work. They're not considered as other when they come to the cities, but they do go back. They go back to their native lands for the census, for example, so that they are counted in their native land. So that's a regular thing that happens whenever there's a census, or even for voting. Some of them are registered in their native lands, so they have to go back for voting. So as they went back, of course, they took the virus with them, and because now these people go to the cities also to kind of reach out for the state, for the state of Bolivia, not necessarily the government, but the state, the presence of the state. And so they go back to their land, and there is almost no presence there. There is many towns have no police force. Many towns have no hospitals. Many towns have roads that are not very good. It's a large country. There's very few Bolivians, so this kind of happens. So they are integrated into the Bolivian culture, but not a culture that you would recognize from outside of Bolivia. And also, not so westernized culture, if you will. So it has affected them. It also came in. We have a big problem with drugs, for example, and now the drug cartels are invading lands, and they took COVID as an opportunity to take over areas that were previously in the hands of indigenous people, and now they are cultivating there. And that the fact that they are cultivating coca gives them a kind of right over land in front of the law. So if you start cultivating a land, you can go and say, well, I'm cultivating here, so this should be mine, and you can. There's some paperwork that you have to do, and that land can be signed over to you. And so they have taken up this. They have taken this opportunity to invade territory that belonged to indigenous groups, and so that's another kind of a secondary effect of the pandemic in Bolivia concerning the indigenous peoples. Now, another thing is we have it's a bit complicated. We have three big regions, geographical regions in Bolivia, and they correspond to roughly three different cultures within Bolivia, and one of them, the biggest one, you've heard of the Incas and all of this. So that culture is very prevalent in the highlands, and they have a caste of religious leaders and lawgivers and medicine men that are actually from another culture. This was even from the time of the Inca. The Aymara were the kind of religious leaders of the Incas, and the Aymaras have tried to bring back this sort of traditional medicine, and they were the ones that were leading this whole idea that the pandemic was a hoax, that the traditional medicine could deal with it by eating a form of dried potatoes. And the vice president, who is an Aymara and who's an Aymara leader, for example, said he was already eating grass so that he would prevent getting COVID. And we don't know if it's a stunt or not, but a few days after he got the vaccine, he said he had got COVID. But so these are things that are happening within the indigenous. Now this is an indigenous population that is not other to the culture. It is very, very mainstream in Bolivia. So it's not, we must try and avoid thinking of them as people who live in a reservation and are far away and have their different cultures. No. They dominate the city. They are a majority in the cities, and they have brought their customs to the cities. And so it has affected them in the cities and in their own regions, in their own traditional lands, if you will.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. Beatrice, I think you might have a bit of a different perspective in Brazil, because Brazil is very large and many indigenous groups are a bit more isolated. So perhaps let's hear your perspective. And Grace, as you prepare, I prefer you, instead of answering Saib's question, I would prefer you to focus on the new question that's in the chat that came from Marian Cohen, and then after that we would end. So Beatrice, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very interesting, and I have to relate it, relate my answer to that problem of the military presence in civil positions, because one of the key civil positions that the military have at the moment in the ministry is at the Ministry of Human Rights. And the Ministry of Human Rights is related and responsible for the work with the indigenous communities. And as you can imagine, there is no specific or notorious knowledge of the present minister, who is an army man and general, in relation to that. And also he is a member of the hardcore military who, on the contrary of what it is understood outside Brazil, where the army, those the responsible for creating Bolsonaro and not the contrary. And that is a discussion we should have perhaps in another moment. It's a very subtle difference, in some moments subtle, in some others no, because for the future, we are at this moment foreseeing that Bolsonarism is going to stay in Brazil, even though Bolsonaro himself perhaps is not anymore at the stage. And in relation to the question of the Aboriginal people, there are a few problems more aggravated by COVID, but exclusively not related so only to COVID. Because the perception of the military in relation to the Aborigines is that they have to be civilized and they have to be introduced into the Western way of understanding the world, etc., etc. And this is a very violent policy, and they are implementing this policy with weapons, and they are murdering a lot of leaders who are opposing this policy. So the Aboriginal people who are organized, and the main leaders at this moment are female leaders. That's very, very important. They are entering the university, they are preparing themselves with their words to give the fight in the field that they are asked to be introduced. It's very, very interesting what it happens. But on the other side, it's very dangerous. And it is a very difficult moment for the Aboriginal people. So it's not easy to explain it, but I thank you for the question, because it is one of the very important items at the political agenda of any progressive government who can emerge from the election, October election. And I finish my intervention also once again saying that it is always a pleasure to be here to exchange ideas in these difficult moments we are facing. And as dear friend Mohanty said, we have to be confident on the possibility of people's resistance. It's the only way we can come through this very, very dangerous moment we are facing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Grace, over to you. So you'll be addressing Marianne specifically.
Yes, and I think that is exactly a great ending, that we should not give up hope on people speaking and resisting these trends. And these trends are, yeah, they as Beatrice was saying about Brazil after Bolsonaro, and Isaac noted after Trump in the United States. It's not, these are trends that are not specific to the individuals. The individuals are sort of manifestations of trends that were already evolving and issues that had not been resolved, and they were made possible through, or these leaders were made possible through these trends. So I think that is the big issue to combat. I think having a comparative study is a really excellent idea, because it's very, very interesting to see why we have this trend towards the right globally. I mean, I think the communications links are important factors, but also some internal developments. What kinds of issues with our institutions? What is the association with neoliberal political economy that's kind of given rise to these deep social divisions that are tied to economic anxieties and the divisions that they create and different identities that they establish in society, which is not necessarily based on class, right? The other identity aspects, color, these kinds of divisions. I think they are associated with the material base, right? With the political economy, but also the institutions, how the institutions of liberal democracy are designed, you know, this kind of assertion of individual liberty above community well-being and public health, I think is very troubling. It's a pattern. So it's very paradoxical, right? We have this kind of identitarian politics being asserted at the, you know, that is premised on the idea of individual liberty. But seemingly, you know, this is attached to certain groups, right? The dominant groups in our different societies, not necessarily numerically dominant, but, you know, those who are in positions, right, maybe have cultural hegemony. If not, you know, in the US, it's a resistance against the so-called elite. You know, the conservatives are rejecting experts, are rejecting scientists and people in the traditional knowledge institutions. So I think all of these require that kind of examination. All of these are sort of implicated. So I think it's a broader, you know, it's a broader question that COVID has raised, and so interesting that there's so many commonality despite the differences in our countries. And I want to end by saying it's so wonderful to see familiar faces and friends, even if we cannot get together. And I hope we will be able to, maybe in October in Bandung. And thank you all so much for wonderful contributions and comments. And thank you, Darvis, for bringing us all together again, and everyone else in the organizing committee.
All right, thank you so much, Grace. So on behalf of Paolo and I'd like to thank you for such a interesting session, and also for those who posed questions. It was also inspiring to hear from the young man Saif. That was really nice to get persons from the younger generations here as well. To end things off, I'll hand over to Darwis. And Darwis, if you want to make a comment on the suggestion that Dimitris made in chat, please feel free to do so as well. Darwis, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just want to say very short that it is a kind of climax of the day when we start from Asia, calm, quiet, and then after that Africa and Europe, Russia, and finally America. So it's like a mounting from a very from the east to the west. So it's very interesting and enriching debate. So we will continue. I want just to give a comment related to the question of Saif, that tomorrow it will be the key person, will be Isaac, will speak about the second phase of decolonization. So this is a very relevant question related to the second phase of decolonization. So we will debate, we will discuss about this at the morning, tomorrow morning. So tomorrow morning, the first is opening session, as if we are in Le Havre, because traditionally the first day in Paris, the second day in Le Havre. So tomorrow is the second day, the opening session in Le Havre, with the projection, the screening of the film made by Lilia Pavlovic. If you remember last year, she was from Belgrade when she was a schoolgirl. She welcomed the heads of states in the non-aligned conference in Belgrade, you remember, and she made a very beautiful film on Marco Polo and the Silk Route, 20 minutes of film. So it is in the opening session tomorrow morning after the break, and then we start the plenary session dedicated to the major change in global major change, gender, ecology, biotechnology, the digital transformation, demography, and second phase of decolonization. So that's the program for tomorrow. We will start at, like this morning, 9:15 French time zone. So it will be too early for American. That's I'm sorry, but well, we are still ruled by the sun, the rotating of our Earth. So thank you very much for this evening. Well, I just read the proposal of Dimitris here. Maybe we must issue an appeal for the waiving of patents of vaccine signed by those of us who agree. I suppose all or most. That's the proposal of, I just read the proposal of Dimitris. So everybody thinks, reflects on this, and see you tomorrow, I hope. And for those who are in France with us, we will offer you dinner in the restaurant, but unfortunately we cannot have a dinner, virtual dinner. So okay. So thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye-bye to everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Say
Thank
good
you.
night.
Good morning, good day, good night.
Yeah. So Professor Mohanty, it is midnight.
Stay well.
Yeah, hey, Brima, you still
Oh.
there? Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Nice.
you.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Thank you, Darwis.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, Surabaya is still awake.
Yeah, 1 a.m.
Yeah.
It was a very good day today. Very good.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah. And tomorrow we will be split into small rooms. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So. So let me stop recording.